Welcome to the Rough Characters Podcast. I am Philip Overby,
And I'm John Palladino.
and today we're going to go in a slightly more negative direction. Not necessarily negative, but just how we kind of uh, experience specific writing style or maybe dialogue that turns us off when we're either reading a book or watching a TV show. And maybe by us talking about this topic, if any people are listening, they might have the same opinion or they might notice something that they do themselves in their own writing and may want to correct it. I mean, we're only two random opinions, but um, sometimes this might be something good to hear. I'm even going to talk about some stuff that I've done in the past that I've since changed. And we'll see where it goes from there. But first, gonna give some news. So, latest news in the Game of Thrones universe, or whatever you want to call it, the Westerosi uh, extended universe, or whatever. It's the Dunk and Egg stories are going to be made into a prequel, which I think could be cool if they do kind of a almost like first season Mandalorian kind of thing, which I know John's not a fan of episodic whatever, but um, I'm more into that kind of thing, like self-contained little adventures. So if that's the direction they're going in, that could be very interesting. So how do you feel about this more prequel news?
I'm always game for more Game of Thrones stuff. I just love that
Yeah.
universe, and I love the shows and how they look. And I hated how Game of Thrones ended, but aside from that, I just love the production value, and I love the adult gritty fantasy. So more of that is always great to hear. However, there's kind of some negatives here too because we have uh, George R. R. Martin confirming that he's going to be like a writer on the show, which I mean, if you're a fan of the books, not great to hear, I think. He's just going to keep writing other stuff. So that's kind of a problem. Obviously, I think this is HBO tapping into trying to earn more money, milking a franchise per se. But as long as the quality is still good, that's great. But there's another show that was announced that's doing even worse than this. So this is expanding, showing new stuff that we haven't seen. But HBO, was it HBO or I can't remember. I think it's HBO announced that they're going to also be making the Harry Potter show, which is going to be like 7 seasons, uh, spread over like 10 years, I think.
Mhm.
With it's just a reboot of the books, so exactly like the movies, just as a show, which I think is ridiculous because we already have the movies. Like, how would it'd be like, okay, now we're gonna do a TV show of Lord of the Rings, like the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings. It's crazy to me because we have these characters already have been acted. They've already done these movies very recently, especially Harry Potter. Lord of the Rings is a little bit less recently, I think, but even so, recently enough that and iconic enough that it just seems foolish. I just don't understand how many people will be able to get past like the new Harry Potter and how he looks and acts, and the new Ron and Hermione. We already have these. If you're a fan of watching things, you already have these visual representations of these characters. You know the story already. Why do we need to see the same story again? What I think they should have done was kind of announced a maybe same idea, just move it in the time so that it's different characters, but such is life. The Duncan egg thing, I'm actually pretty excited for. It's actually kind of funny because I just a month ago read I think it's called The Night of the Seven Kingdoms, the collection
Yeah,
of
I think
the
so. Yeah.
couple novellas. I really loved it. I hadn't read anything by George R. R. Martin since A Dance of Dragons came out because I read that like the year it released, and I've been dying for more in that world. And so I finally decided I'll try the Duncan Egg stories, and I was so pleasantly surprised by them.
Yeah, I feel like the ones that I read, they're lighter kind of stories compared to the rest of Game of Thrones. Obviously, that they're more like, from what I remember, they're more like a knight and his squire do quests,
Yes,
kind of thing. So it's not as dire and dark and grim or whatever.
there are still some dark moments, but
Not as
it's not
much.
like the same. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and in reference to like going back and like rehashing stuff that's already been done, that's been a Hollywood problem that people have kind of harped on for years. It's like do new
I
stuff,
know.
leave the old stuff alone. But I mean, Disney is horrible about this also. We
Yes.
got to do a live action of every animated thing we've ever done.
They're all terrible, apparently. I haven't seen any of them, but they all sound terrible.
I haven't seen any of them either. I guess the idea is to introduce them to a new audience, a new generation of people, because, like, I guess, like, these series were beloved by other people, but maybe they need to update the story for the current generation or whatever the reasoning is.
In all fairness, though, those movies came out in I think the first one came out in the 30s, right? First Disney film.
Yeah, I mean,
It's been a while.
yeah. So I can understand in a way, but like, I don't know. I'm always the type of person like, let's do something that hasn't been done yet, at least, even if it's a prequel. Do something
Mm-hmm.
that hasn't been explored yet or whatever.
I'm the
So
same.
that kind of ties into our topic, writing that turns us off or makes us kind of like, eh. And one of the things that kind of turns me off is when I read something or watch something that is blatantly this this thing. It's like deliberately trying to get on the bandwagon of something that was already successful. I mean, example of this could be like, they make a new, for example, the Dungeons and Dragons movie just came out, right? And then another company produces a Dungeons and Dragons style movie, but it's like lower production value and shittier actors and everything. Uh,
Right.
uh, I just don't like stuff that's like so derivative and deliberately like following some kind of formula. And I think writers want to obviously make money off their writing, so they need to follow at least some of the tropes that have been previously established. But it's like if you're just writing just to copy someone else's style or to capitalize, like sometimes I've seen authors, they'll name their book like a game of something, and it's like,
Yeah, it drives me nuts.
you're clearly trying to show up on the algorithm there. If somebody types in a Game of Thrones, oh, there's
Yeah.
a game of coffee. Oh, read that one or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't like that either. That really annoys me. And it's just almost lazy in my opinion. I don't know.
So
There's a few formulas of naming that like is obviously copied from like really well-known books, and it just seems like people use them too much.
oh, that's a naming. That's another thing. I know you really hate names that are difficult to pronounce, or I
It's
don't
true.
know. I don't know if you were going to bring that up, but
I actually I wasn't, but you're right. Man, I cannot stand this. Typically happens in fantasy books, but like names that are like impossible to pronounce for no reason. Like, why? Unless it's based on a culture that has difficult to pronounce names, in which case I probably won't read that anyway, because that's the names are such a strong point of reading for me that if I can't pronounce any of them, I won't get anything out of the book. I'll be too focused on like how do you say this. So when some authors who shall go unnamed because A, I don't remember specifically who does this, and B, I would want to pick a fight with them. But there's some authors I've read books by where it's like every other name honestly looks like they pounded it out on a keyboard randomly and then inserted some apostrophes. And like, why? There's no reason for that. We can have easy to pronounce names. It's not hard to do. I'm a writer. I do it all the time. It's very simple. Just make easy to pronounce syllables, put them together. You got an easy to pronounce name. I don't understand this like weird, wacky crap just because it's a fantasy novel. You know, for apostrophes are not necessary.
yeah, I think for example, like when I read, we'll go back to George Martin when I read Game of Thrones. There were really, since the the books are kind of loosely based on War of Roses, which is a real, thing in history. So a lot of the names, it's an English book, and then a lot of the names kind of have English sounding, and then even the like Dothraki and stuff like that, it sounds, you can still kind of figure out what it is. But yeah, sometimes I'll read a book and I'll be like, oh yeah, and then do you remember when Cersei did blah 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 blah? And then people are like, Cersei, that's how you pronounce her name. Like, yeah. I got Cersei. Oh, Cersei. Okay, cool. Whatever.
Right. It's just makes it so much harder to read if you get hung up on names like that, I think. But honestly, out of all the issues I have with writing, that one might be, it's really important to me to be able to pronounce the names, but in comparison to some of the other issues I have, it's probably low on the list.
Yeah. So what's one of your issues? Major
I
issue.
think my biggest issue, I got two, so I guess I'll go with this one first. And this is one that you'll probably strongly disagree with if I were to guess from you. But when we're talking really beautiful or flowery or like purple prose, just these descriptions that go on, or these metaphors constantly thrown in there, like comparisons to different things. I just I phase out during a lot of that. I like, I don't need to hear about these either unrealistic descriptions or like overly poetic descriptions. Like, why? I don't know. It to me it takes away from the story a lot. Uh,
Why would I disagree with you about this?
I kind of assumed that you'd actually be a fan of it for a few reasons. One is that you're a teacher. Teachers like that shit. Two,
We do like that shit, yes.
I two is I know some of the books that you read.
Mm.
Uh, that we just talked about, R. Scott, is it Baker? I always said Baker, but
Backer, I think.
is it Backer? I don't know. Anyway, I've never read his books. You said I wouldn't like them.
I don't think he writes that way though. I think he
No,
he has a lot of world building stuff, and I think that's what you wouldn't like. I think you might get bogged down because it's not the story's not as straightforward. So that's the aspect I think you wouldn't like. Like it's not like this person is doing this and it's very kind of non-linear
right. Okay.
and there's a lot of names to keep up with, and based on your reaction to Malazan books also, I just kind of feel you probably wouldn't like that vibe.
Gotcha. Yes, famously,
I don't
do
think
not like Malazan.
I don't think he has flowery or poetic kind of language. His writing style is very good and very but it's not. But at times it doesn't feel like a typical fantasy novel. If
Mhm.
I don't know how to explain it better.
So
but
I thought he had a lot of like flowery poetic writing. I guess I misunderstood that.
no, I don't feel like he does.
Okay.
I think I think more. I think based on your reaction to some other kind of stories that I feel like you're like a big Joe Abercrombie person. He's very like,
This.
here's the story and here's these characters and here's what they're doing, and everything is very
Right.
clear, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
mean one writer is better than the other. It's just that's how he presents the story. Whereas Backer and some of the other people I read, the stories are kind of like you're really not sure what's going on sometimes, and that's appealing to
Right.
me.
Yeah, I don't like that so much.
The mystery of like what's happening and like who's aligned with who and why, and the Grimdark group, actually people come in there and say I want something really dark, it's political and has lots of crazy twists and da, da, da. Every time people are like Backer. So I'm just default now. I'm like Backer, uh, because a lot of people love his writing, it, but it's not easy to get into. I think it's not the type of writing that I like. If somebody was first getting into Grimdark, I wouldn't say read this because it's just
Right.
denser style. I guess um, it's not beginner Grimdark. I would say.
So do you like things like Tolkien or like classic literature or
I do, but not well. Tolkien's one of those things where I've never read any of the Lord of the Rings books,
you're not missing anything?
just because I watched the movies, and I felt like I got the story from the movies the way I wanted to get it. Um, but I do like a lot of classical writing. It's not because of the goofy poetic language or anything. That's not the reason I like it. It's the like Shakespeare we had talked about a little bit.
Ugh.
Um, I think we had talked about off. We never actually talked about this on camera or in the podcast, but Shakespeare stories to me are kind of like timeless stories of betrayal and death and you know love and all these kind of things.
Yeah, I
But
suppose if you can stomach the language.
that's the issue. That's the issue. It's the language. So I'm more about what the story and what the characters and everything, how it kind of pieces together, and the language is just kind of the way people get to that point. So I wouldn't say I necessarily like the Shakespearean language, but I like the stories that are told. Like Beowulf is one of the oldest poems ever written, and that's still
Yeah, it's a
very
poem though. So now.
It's a very compelling, interesting story. So I guess for me, like I look at language as a tool and not as something that like that I harp on too much or look at too much. If the story and the characters and everything kind of all work together, that's why I think watching like a stage performance of Hamlet or something is much more appealing than like reading it, because when you see the stage version, you can understand why Shakespeare was a playwright and they were meant to be performed. They're not meant to just be read. Um, so,
Right.
and you still see these stories kind of retreaded even 400, 500 years later, because they're kind of timeless stories. So the language stuff for me, I like, um, language sometimes, but I'm not as like, I think you probably perceive me as like a book snob or something. Like I only read high literary fantasy. Like it's not like that. I don't even write stuff like that. Like my writing is very like meat and potatoes writing, and you would think I write this kind of weird
Right.
abstract stuff, but I really don't.
But you can't fully escape the teaching,
Yeah, I mean, if I was teaching Shakespeare to my students, for example, they're Japanese
I'd feel
students.
very sad for your students.
They're Japanese students. So I couldn't teach the
Right.
language. It's just too far beyond
Right.
anything.
Yeah.
Um,
They're very lucky students.
yeah, I'm not going to teach them that aspect. I might teach them like, the story of Romeo and Juliet is tragic because they both
Right.
love each other and they can't be with each other because their families hate each other. And this is like something that people can feel because they've experienced it. Like you have a boyfriend or girlfriend and you can't be with them because your family hates them or they're from a lower status or whatever.
Right.
So those are the aspects, the more of the thematic stuff or the story and the characters, motivations and stuff. That's the kind of stuff I care about.
Right.
But I do like good prose. Um, it's just hard to. It's very very hard to do well, and I think that's where the flowery purple prose on it comes from, because it's people trying to replicate something that they like. So that they have
Right.
there's a writer like Tolkien who is kind of famous for doing that kind of thing, and they're trying to replicate what he did, and they're saying, well, Tolkien did it. Tolkien did it, and no one has really successfully done it since. I mean, there's people that have kind of copied Tolkien in a storytelling aspect or like world building aspect, but I don't think anyone has been successful that writes like Tolkien now. I mean, I can't think of anybody.
I would just like to say thank God.
I mean, there are people that try to write like Tolkien, but
Right.
and I think there's people that are inspired by him, but I don't think there's people that write exactly like Tolkien wrote and are successful. Like, I mean, however you want to determine successful, like sold a bunch of copies of books or
Right.
like well known.
Have you
Uh,
read Patrick Rothfuss?
I did read the first book. That's the only one.
He's often called a beautiful writer, and I actually really like that series, which is surprising to me.
Again, that's when I read that, I didn't really think about the writing style itself. I'm not a
I found it pretty approachable myself.
yeah, I didn't find it to be any. I mean, I'm trying to think of a writer I've read recently where I'm just like, wow. I mean, there's a lot of people really like Guy Gavriel Kay. He's a Canadian writer, and people
Yeah.
people always talk about how much they love his prose. And
I think I tried him once, and I think I DNF'd the book, but it was so long ago, I don't remember.
But he's one of those like I'd like to get into one day, but I think he's known for like very like well written prose and everything.
Right.
Um, and he's also somebody that's written all sorts of different stuff. He doesn't write just like one style. So, um, I mean, I know we're kind of getting off like stuff we don't like, and we're kind of talking about stuff we like now.
It's true.
Um, but I think you can tell like if people do stuff that is too derivative, then um, it doesn't matter like how good a writer you are because people are going to be like, oh, that's too much like blah 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 blah.
Right.
Um, I mean, this is something we've talked about before, maybe, and I think this is kind of a universally hated thing. So I don't think anybody's going to really disagree with me. But fantasy is kind of infamous for like world building info dumping and
Right. Yeah.
kind of hitting you with all this stuff like right at the beginning of the story. And I don't understand why people do that. They still do that.
I don't either. It doesn't make sense because so I have this thing I always tell beginning writers. I always say, listen, nobody gives a shit about your world until they do, because in the beginning of your book, no one cares about any of this extra information until they're farther into the book and they actually care about the book, like the story, right? So when you hit them with all this stuff in the beginning, no one gives a shit because they have no context for any of it. They have no attachment to anything in it. And this like info dump, you don't internalize any of it because it's pointless information. You're not in the world. You have no idea what's happening. And I don't understand why that is such a prevalent thing to start with. You know, a lot of books start with like the history of what happened, and you're just like, why do I care about any of this? And then, you know, it's because in chapter 86, there's some obscure reference to it. It's like, I don't need this history.
I mean, even in like I think this kind of thing still even happens like in mainstream published books. So it's not like it's a indie,
Right.
you know, amateur indie whatever thing. Not to say indie authors are amateur, but like people that are uh have no gatekeeper kind of thing. They might be able to publish that kind of stuff more easily. Um, I mean, I don't understand why. And I think it's the Tolkien effect. I think because Tolkien did a lot of this kind of like. I mean, he wrote a whole book of world building, essentially, from what I gather about the Silmarillion. It's just a world
Yeah.
building book, basically. And some people are really into that kind of thing. And I think, I mean,
Not me.
even uh, the book that House of the Dragon comes from, Fire and Blood,
Yeah.
it's like a history kind of, but it's told
Right. I was just going to bring up Martin because he has a couple of those, I think.
but it's told in a it's not told in like a dry historical way. I feel like I mean it does name drop some people and stuff, but it has story elements to it, so it's not like
I don't know, man. Um, I don't know which one I bought. I have one of them. It has an orange cover. I think it's called Fire and Blood. Um, I don't remember. It was a long time ago, and I bought it, and I tried reading it, and I thought it was the most boring thing in the world. And this is coming from someone who, you know, George R. R. Martin is one of my favorite authors of all time. But man, I just can't. I couldn't get into that. Just, I think it's just because it's like not really a whole like a story. I guess it's just like it reads like it almost reads like an encyclopedia. That's what it reminded me of. Was like
mm,
an encyclopedia when I was a kid, and I had to like do the research projects.
Well, I'd love to do a research project on that. Here, do a research project on Fire and Blood. I'll be like, okay, cool. Um, I was just thinking another thing. Uh, I tend to not like, or I don't like this criticism, and I don't understand why this is a thing. But when people write fantasy, for example, and then sometimes they use anachronisms, you know, things that don't belong in that historical time period, or they use language that doesn't technically belong, and they're like, couldn't get into the story because they're using modern language. And it's like, what is modern? What is modern language? Like that could be,
Yeah,
you know,
I don't understand that criticism. For, unless it's including a, you know, obviously back in medieval ages we didn't have a microwave. So if you said microwave, then like, yeah, I would say that is stupid. But I've had people message me and say like about my own writing, like, listen, I really liked your book. Well, and I actually disagree with this, but I really liked your book, but you said ass, and that really took me out of it because that's just not like, and in my opinion, I was like, first of all, ass, I feel like is a very old word, but whatever. Uh,
arse. You should have said arse.
apparently, but I also say fuck a lot in my books, so like, I don't know how old that is, but for me, it's like if the language is modern, so uh, I don't I don't really know how old fuck is, but pretending that it's a very modern swear, which I don't think it is all that modern. Uh, why would I try and figure out what language is appropriate back then? I'm not writing like I lived back then, right? I'm writing for audiences now, and so plus it's fantasy. It's not a historical fiction, so the language isn't really dictated by historical accuracies. That being said, I'm reading a book right now that's I don't want to name, so I won't because it's I just, you know, I know the author for one, and so I don't really want to like start anything, but it has these comparisons or metaphors, I guess, that really don't fit the world at all and are very jarring because it's just like, would that really be a comparison that they're making? For example, they are on this. It's a sci-fi, and they're on a moon, I think, uh, living in this kind of colony that is not a burgeoning colony. It's kind of like a struggling, uh, run down type feeling place.
If you're
And they're
talking,
const
if you're talking about it, isn't the author going to know you're talking about their book?
I don't think so because it's
Okay.
vague enough. I think it's vague enough where it could be in a lot of different books.
Okay.
But there's this comparison that's being made. And also, I don't think the author is going to watch this. But anyway, there's this one comparison where like they're talking about almost in the narrative as if they like lived on Earth like we do, and they're referring to like different places in comparison to like what they're doing, and it's just like, but those places probably didn't actually exist in the colony based on the way it's written and the feel of the colony, and this person lived in the colony their entire life, and it's just like, I don't think that really actually is landing here. You know, it'd be like the equivalent. So I didn't really want to give specifics because I'm not trying to out the book or the author, but an equivalent example would be like you telling me that there are, maybe you're in walking around in Japan right now, and it's a very busy uh, street. So you maybe you send me a text and you're like, wow, it is busier on this street than it is on a mining colony on Io, a moon of Jupiter, I think. First of all, you would never say that because we don't know what a mining colony, how busy that would be, right? Because we don't live on a mining colony. It's the same idea, it's just reversed, like referring to it's just like entertainment of on Earth that I just don't think they would have on that colony. And so it just was very jarring to me. It's like you guys are like in a poverty stricken place that's very focused on work and survival. I just don't think that you have these entertainment buildings that you're just going and enjoying time doing whatever. And it's like, a little jarring there. But otherwise, I definitely think that modern language and fantasy makes sense unless you're making a comparison like that with something that doesn't actually exist in the world. I don't think I actually have any examples of that because most people generally don't do that, I don't think. But, if you're writing an adventure scene in a fantasy novel and you saw lava that was hotter than the boiling water that was heated in a microwave, we would be like, that doesn't make sense. But
Yeah. So kind of circling back to the original, having modern language and fantasy or whatever.
right.
I rather somebody do that than try to shoehorn their own fantasy language to replace
Oh
something
god, that's
that
so bad.
we already know. So for example, if you say spikes came out of the earth, it's like we can't call it earth because it's not earth, right?
Right.
So we have to call it Gemeld or something. Spikes came
Okay.
out of the crust of Gemeld, and it's just like, just call it what we know it is.
Right. Okay, so you just brought up some funny point because as you know, I am an admin of a writing group on Facebook.
Yeah.
And in this writing group, frequently I see the same thing, same question come up from beginning writers. And it's always such a ridiculous idea, in my opinion. So they'll say, hey, I have cows in my fantasy world. Okay. But they're not called cows in my fantasy world. I'm trying to think of a name for them. Can anyone offer any suggestions? And it's like, what? Yeah, call them cows because they are cows. Are you changing the name of every single animal in your world? No. Then why would you change cows to something else? Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Dog.
And
it's not a dog.
Right. There's just no reason to do it. Like, why? We already have a word for it. Instead, you're going to call it Moloxin. I don't know. And now every time we say it, we have to think that we have to remember it's a cow. And then what? You're gonna have a glossary and it's gonna say a cow is a Moloxin. A dog is a flog. I don't know. But like, why? Yeah.
Well, I think
it's pointless.
Here's a slight difference. Like, okay, so if they call the cow Moloxin, and maybe Moloxin are not docile animals that just eat grass, they're actually carnivorous.
But they aren't a cow.
so they're a cow, but they're carnivorous cows. So then you could say, okay, we'll call them Moloxin because they're different somehow. They're not just cows.
Agreed.
So, but yeah, I think that is kind of an amateur thing where they're worried about these very minute things that are never gonna actually affect the story at all. Like, I've never actually understood people asking, I have a warrior in my story and I can't think of a name. Give me a name, please. It's like, why do you do that? Come up with it yourself. like if you're struggling with like story stuff, then yeah, sure, that's what those groups are
Right.
for. But like, I can't come up with a name for. I mean, Google something or use a random name generator if you're struggling that hard. Um,
Right.
I've just never understood like this. It's like writing that focuses so much on these little things that don't matter ultimately to the you enjoying the story or the characters. Um, so like if I'm reading something and it's like the Maloxan gathered near near the coast and Shalaman uh brushed their black and white coats before milking them. It's like, okay, what is the point of this if this is just a cow?
Right.
And it's the same thing people do with orcs and goblins. They don't want to call them orcs and goblins, so they call them boblins or
Right. Like
or
why?
something. Uh,
Borks.
I kind of feel like I mean I may be wrong, but I kind of feel like Robert Jordan kind of did that with what are they called? Trollocs.
Products. Yeah, I think.
Aren't they
Uh,
basically just orcs? I mean, what's the difference between them and
Honestly, Phil, I don't know. I hate that series. I read the first book a really long time ago. This is kind of going into my another type of writing I don't like, which is very like predictable, cliche, like normal epic fantasy. Just all the good characters are good and
uh,
all the bad characters are bad. And then like the good characters are always going to persevere and like win, and the bad characters are always going to be like bad. And I just I don't think that's very realistic, right? I just think that like people are more fluid than good or bad. I think that good people are going to die in battle and wars. Now, I've heard that in like the really later books of Wheel of Time, people start dying, but to me, I don't think it's worth reading 12 books to get to the part where like people start dying.
yeah, just like when I first read Eye of the World years ago or started reading it because people, you know, a lot of my friends liked it. And, you know, the friends that recommended it were people I trusted. And when I started reading it, I kind of just kept waiting for like something. I don't know what it was. I was just like, when is when is the thing gonna happen? I don't know. It was just very
Yeah.
I guess it was just too slow for me because I kind of grew up reading a lot of Dragonlance and Forgotten Realms stuff, which is very like get into it, kind of like almost like a D&D game. Like they're going on a quest, they're fighting shit, stuff happens. So like these really slow burn fantasy things, I tend to not get into as much, and I think it's I don't know if it's a detriment to myself because people tell me like, "Oh, you have to read this series," and I'm like, "Sorry, it's just too slow for me." Um, it's not a
Yeah.
criticism against the series; it's just not my style, and I feel
That's how I
like,
feel about Lord of the Rings too. Just too slow.
yeah, I mean, I don't have to have like killing or like crazy shit happening from the first page, but it's like there needs
Right.
to be some like major conflict happening, like tangible thing that I can see, I guess.
There needs to be action, but the action doesn't have to be actual action. There needs to be whether it's tension between two characters or like something political happening, or maybe it's just a bully at school. There just has to be something uh that's like engaging me, I think. If it takes 150 pages of describing forests and giving backgrounds of stuff that doesn't matter and explaining what this town looks like, which doesn't make any sense because they're about to leave it anyway, so who cares what it looks like? Then it's like, yeah, let's move on, please. And my problem with like for Lord of the Rings specifically, is even when you start to get into the action stuff, it still feels like it's just more about what everything looks like and then it is like what's actually happening.
Yeah. One more thing that sticks out to me that I was thinking are, um, I don't know what you would call it, but it's like, well, I do know what you would call it, but I feel like it's just filler in a way, like using different speech tags. So like blah 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 said, just use said. It's just like I don't understand like using
um
opined or uh gesticulated or I don't know. Like
okay, so
I don't like that kind of stuff.
yeah, I fall very much in the camp of using just said and asked.
Mm,
Uh like 99% of the time. Every once in a while, maybe something else fits. But that being said, uh I really strongly cannot stand when every single line of dialogue is just Phil said, Jeremy said, and that gets really repetitious really quickly, and that pulls me out super hard. So I really prefer a mix of said and then I really like a lot of like action tags
yeah.
instead of like dialogue tags because man, they say that said is an invisible word. I would say that's a lie. If you use it too often, it is not invisible, and it's just like the most annoying thing in the world to me. But to your points, especially in younger fantasy, you get a lot of the adverbs saids. So like said sadly, or you know, wearily asked. And it's just like, why? We don't need
I
these. We
mean,
know that they're sad. Like
you wouldn't have to even say you could express the same thing through their language, like what they're actually saying, or
right,
through
exactly.
like an action, like you said, like if somebody's
You should
sad.
not have to write Phil shouted.
Yeah. So yeah, I think said and asked are pretty standard, and then but yeah, I don't I tend to like, even in my own writing, I tend to like if I have three characters talking at the same time. Um, maybe if their style of talking is clear enough, you can get away with not even using tags. You can just have dialogue, and then occasionally you can
True.
put so and so said. Um, but yeah, nothing. Something about the word like guffawed. Like if I see guffawed, it's like chortled. Just kind of like, I mean, I might put it in my own writing just to be funny, but because one of the things I had said when I first started writing the Splatter Elf stuff was I was going to use adverbs on purpose, but I was going to make up my own adverbs, so like
Oh,
stuff that doesn't even make sense. But my writing originally was kind of like a parody of like, uh, you know, what would you call it? Murder hobo style D and
right.
D, where everyone's just crazy and killing each other, kind of thing. Um, but yeah, as far as we haven't really talked about TV or movies or anything, so let's just briefly touch on that. So I think for me, um, unless you're like really good at making movies or TV shows, and you can get away with it occasionally. And I know you don't like Breaking Bad, but they did this like one episode. They had no talking through the whole episode. It was all just like actions they were doing, but it was like one of the most praised episodes because nobody had talked through the whole episode and it was like still very interesting. But
Right.
but for me, like when characters don't talk for a really long time, that really pulls me out of the story because like I
I
don't
don't
want
like
to
that either.
I don't want to just see people sitting around looking at each other. Like I want them to be talking or doing something. So that's why
Uh,
like stories that have like just one character doing something and he has no one around to talk to, sometimes it kind of, I don't know, drags for me a little bit.
Season 2 of The Mandalorian had that as well, quite a bit, with like long opening scenes where like no one's talking or doing much.
Mm,
And I'm just not a fan of that. For me, I think in shows or movies, it's just unrealistic, stupid things. I think the best example I have of this is like in the Rings of Power, episode 1. Did you see that episode?
I feel like I'm gonna eventually just watch the whole thing just so I can experience what
I
everyone
only
keeps talking about.
so have you seen any of the show?
No, I haven't seen any of it.
Okay, so in the first episode, this happens in the first 5 minutes, so it's not even a spoiler, but it is an incredibly eye-rolling moment. Galadriel is I don't know where she is. I'm not a Lord of the Rings buff, so I don't really know much of what's happening, if we're being honest. She's in this crypt or underground thing. I don't remember. It's been a while. She's in this place with some soldiers and they're trying to do something and they get attacked by an ogre, I think. And these guards who are supposed to be like some of the most elite elf fighters, warriors, I think, are pathetically terrible against fighting against this thing. And then Galadriel shows up, and one of the men shoves his shield into the ground and like angles it so that it's like facing towards the ogre, and she runs up it like a ramp, jumps through the air, spins, and just cuts it and kills it. And like,
Nice.
why? Like, I just
Sweet.
don't like that really pathetic
Fuck,
writing. Like,
fucking
it's just
sweet.
it's just so stupid. Like, I can't. Star Wars does it too, and the sequel trilogy especially. It's just like,
That's what the writer wants people to, when they see stuff like that, they want to be
oh
like,
god,
oh,
it's
that was
they
fucking
always.
sweet.
I know they always like write it like it's supposed to be fucking sweet, but it never is because it just feels so unearned and stupid and cheesy and unrealistic. But that's just how I feel about it.
Well, I kind of feel what they're trying to do because this was a legitimately kind of cool moment in the Lord of the Rings movies where I think Legolas was like, what was he?
Fuck him. I hated him in those movies even as a kid. I was like, this is so stupid.
This is the only like kind of cool thing he did. Like he slid down the elephant's
No,
tusk.
no,
That
I
was
fucking
kind of
hated
cool.
that. No, get out of here.
But I think
I was
that's
rolling my eyes in the theaters as a kid. I
that's what
was
they
like, are
were
you
trying.
kidding me?
That's what they were trying to replicate. I think.
I don't care. It's so bad.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I guess I thought that looked cool.
Ugh.
I don't know how old I was. Well, I guess I was a teenager when Lord of the
You
Rings
had to
came
be
out.
older than I was. And I was, I would say, a young teenager when those came out, I think.
The more irritating stuff for me, for Lord of the Rings anyway. And I know this is part of like his world, but like the dwarf and elf thing where they're like, I don't like elves and I don't like dwarves, but
Right.
now we're best friends. Sure. Uh,
2001 to 2003 was when the three movies
oh,
came
okay.
out.
So I was in college, I guess.
I was in well, I graduated in 2007, so I was in early high school, I guess. But oh god, I hated Gimli and Legolas because they were just invincible and just so hokey and cheesy whenever they fought. I just couldn't stand that, even as a kid.
I just, for me, it's like I watched a lot of, um, when I watch, but like when I would play D&D, like those kind of characters were like the generic character. Like if you were playing a
Right.
dwarf, you were Gimli. If you were playing an elf, you were Legolas. It's like those are the generic. Like I'm a very elegant elf and I use a longbow, and I'm a very gruff dwarf and I use an axe. And it's like, okay,
Right.
cool. Um, like would be cooler to me is like if you had a dwarf that used a bow, because then at least it's like,
Yeah.
wow, that's different. And he's not in a bad mood all the time. He's actually very quite calm. Um, yeah, that's why those when Tolkien did it, it was kind of original, but now it's generic. Unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know. Um, yeah, but I think that's all I really have that kind of turns me off. So if you're a writer or a reader and you agree or disagree with us, please tell us why. And I'd love to hear more thoughts about that. Um, so before we end this episode, let's get into a battle. And today I'm roping John into a battle with a roper. See what I did there?
All right. Let's
Bad puns. Those are also a thing I don't like, even though I do them often.
I like them in like everyday conversation. I don't like them in movies or books or whatever most of the time. Sometimes it can be funny. But often I think not. I don't know. It's really dependent on the situation, I think. All right, Captain Ferdinand Reiner. Let's see what your initiative is going to be here.
Rope.
Jesus.
Where you get in that one? Nice. Oh, your deck's shit too. I forgot about that.
Yes, it's so bad. It's so bad. So bad.
Let's see, Roper. Roper's got a pretty shitty decks too.
It's it's not gonna go after me though.
I think that's impossible, actually.
Yeah.
So I go first. All right, what can the Roper do? It looks like it has a multi attack, 4 attacks. Wow,
Oh,
could just
fuck.
legend you to death.
I think I might be in trouble here.
All right, makes 4 attacks with its tendril, uses reel, and makes 1 attack with its bite. Well, holy crap, that's a lot. So I can make 4 attacks with tendrils. So the tendril is a melee +7. And you're grappled unless you do an escape DC 15. And you have
Do I do that?
disadvantage.
Do I do that now?
I'm not sure.
Or
Let's see.
let's look them up. All right, so
This thing gets 6 attacks. It's pretty crazy.
that is pretty crazy.
All right. Well, let's
Only a
just
challenge rating 5. Jesus.
let's see if I hit you. So +7. All right. Pretty sure that hit. 26.
Yeah, that's it.
All right. So this doesn't actually do any damage, I don't think. It just restrains you.
Oh, what is it?
The tendril. So I hit you with the tendril, and now you have to do an escape.
Oh, okay. So that's why it's not that bad because the 4 attacks with the tendrils don't actually do any damage. It's just
I think you can grapple multiple targets, probably. That's probably why
Right.
it's like that.
Okay, so I have to make an escape DC of 15. I forget what I roll for that. Is it a dexterity saving throw?
I would imagine it's a dex saving throw, yeah.
That's what we'll roll with because not. Oh, a natural 20 to follow my natural one.
All right,
Well, I
so
escaped one tendril.
you escaped that tendril.
I anticipate not being able to escape all four.
Here's the next one.
All right, so then. Oh yeah, whoops, you did. You definitely hit. You got a +7. Yeah. Okay, so I
Dex.
avoided that one.
All right, next one.
I don't know how I'm getting so lucky with my dexterity saves. That's what, an 18? Still a hit, so I have to make another save. Oh, I failed.
All right, so you're grappled now.
I'm being reeled in.
So uses reel. The roper pulls each creature grappled by it up to 25 feet. Well, you're already standing next to me, so now you're just really standing next to
Yes,
me.
I'm on top of you for real. And then what? I get bitten.
Bite, yes. And the bite
Oh,
is
boy.
pretty
Nasty.
rough.
All right.
So bite
+7.
is +7, and it does 48 plus 4 damage.
All right.
Maybe you're gonna get it.
This could be a one-hit kill here. Oh, that's a hit.
That's a hit.
Oh dear.
So 48 plus 4. 48.
Yep, that's it.
28 damage.
All right, I died.
One round kill. Nice.
Yeah, that was might be the quickest fight we've had.
We had one other one where I think I got killed one shot.
Okay. Before taking turn. Yeah, it's possible. All right, let's roll for my mundane item here. Interesting. I got a contract for services. Whatever that means. But that's okay. A contract for services. All right. Well, interesting. If this was like a real game, I feel like that could be really interesting.
I think fighting a roper in a real game would be more like if you had a
Terrifying.
full party,
Yeah.
you could probably
That
fight
would
it.
be really crazy to have like multiple people reeled in at the same time.
So a challenge rating 5 would be typically level 5 people. A level 5 party could fight.
Right.
Okay. So what level are you? 3 or 4?
No, I'm level 4.
Oh, okay.
But to be fair, my stats for a level 4 character are actually pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Because they're not optimized. Because I can't remember, but I think we rolled down in a row and just took whatever we got.
Yeah.
And unfortunately my dexterity is like, terrible and my health is also terrible. So, what can you do?
Yeah. Good thing these aren't real characters. They'd be pretty shit. Well, that ends another episode, and thanks everyone for watching. John, would you like to mention anything before we go?
If you want to check out my books on Amazon, The Trials of Ashmount is only 99 cents, and the sequel, Buzzard's Bowl, just came out. If you haven't checked out the artwork for that, it's spectacular. I think that's all I have to say, really.
I agree. And I actually noticed something on your artwork that somebody had pointed out that I didn't notice the first time.
Yeah?
I don't know if this is a spoiler. I guess it's not, but it's actually in an arena.
Yes.
So when I first looked at it, I was like, oh, he's in the ocean. But then I'm looking at that I saw, oh, there's the border of the arena. So it's like
Yeah, it's kind of a,
ocean inside of arena kind of thing.
yeah, it's kind of a tricky piece of work, I think, if you're not looking for it. But is it a spoiler? Not really. But it's I had that concept in my head for that artwork from the very almost beginning of writing the first book. And when I found the artist to do the cover arts for both of them, the whole time I was actually looking for someone who I thought could do the artwork for the second book. And I wasn't even thinking about the first book. So when I found the artist, then I obviously had him do the first book first. And while it's a really good piece of work, I really like the second one a lot.
Yeah, it's very eye-catching. Well, as far as me, please subscribe to this channel, and it's still a pretty small channel, so I'm just kind of trucking along here and just producing content and hoping somebody will stumble across and watch everything that's on here. But I'll be producing more solo stuff in addition to the Rough Characters podcast, so come by and check it out. And if you're interested in grimdark fiction, I run the Grimdark Fiction Readers and Writers group on Facebook, so you can come by there. Join the group if you're into grim stuff and have a chat. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching / listening / whatever.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.